All right, well, it's noon, maybe 12:01, so we'll get started just to kind of respect everyone's time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you everyone who zoomed in. Hopefully you can see okay. She's going to be writing on the board a little bit and then also walking around and speaking. So if you can't hear us, please let us know and then we'll try to get everything fixed in. But welcome. It is September. Holy cow. It is Productivity and Time Management and Stress Month, which is why we have fabulous Jill Farmer here to present. We will be recording this, so if you can't stay for the whole thing or need to jump off Zoom, we'll have it posted hopefully by tomorrow afternoon so you can go back and watch everything. So we will kind of just do what we always do and go through the room and introduce yourselves, maybe do like kind of what we'll do first job and current job. I know we've done it before, but there's some new faces in here, so that's always a fun one. First ever job.
Ever.
Thank you for clarifying. And then current job and position.
I'm Jill Farmer. My first job was detasseling corn in Iowa for minimum wage, which when you were 14 years old to make a whole $3.35 an hour versus the $1 or $1.50 an hour I was making babysitting. I couldn't imagine the riches of working 40 hours a week for those few weeks. It was as hot and buggy as you would think it is. It also helped deter me from a life of manual labors. And that was also very effective. And my current job is I am a coach who specializes in time and stress management. Most of my work is with organizations. And I wear a couple of different hats right now. So I work with all kinds of organizations in St. Louis, everybody from Purina to Anders, doing internal training as well as external speaking. And then I also have, the other hat is working almost exclusively with physicians through a relationship I have at Harvard Medical School on a wellness initiative to help prevent burnout. We all want our physicians to avoid burnout with surgeons there. And then through a company called Doc Working, founded by a physician. And we provide coaching and courses and ways to support our physicians. And it's needed, as we all can agree, more than ever right now, given the amount of output they have. So a lot of my work is informed by working with very busy professional women, exactly like you guys. We're gonna talk today. I wish I could say that we weren't being too optimistic when we named this post-pandemic productivity. I did make the post a little smaller. So we're still going to call it post-pandemic productivity. And so some of you might have experienced the last, I keep having to, as I've given talks to this, I'm like, remember when I was thinking the last 6 months, phew, can't believe it. Now it's like the last 19 months. Because that's kind of when the disruption began. Experienced a lot of big changes. It was a disruption, no matter where we were on the spectrum. For some of us, it was disruption in all capital letters of every aspect of our life: home, family, work, marriage, extended family relationships. Other people, it wasn't as big of disruption because of the way that you work. It didn't make a big change, but somewhere along the spectrum, our lives were disrupted. And one of my clients, I'll call Samantha, said it beautifully. She's like, on the one hand, I was kind of living my life in this planter that felt like it was a little too small for me, tending my garden, and that container got smashed. But now I'm in this place where I'm kind of trying to garden everywhere, and I'm not exactly sure where my plot is or how to harvest it in a way that doesn't feel so extensive. I love that metaphor. So I want to hear from you guys. Just shout it out. If you had to name some of the challenges to your productivity that you've experienced in this, we'll call it pandemic or post-pandemic, mildly post-pandemic era, what would you say some of the biggest challenges to your productivity are?
Flexibility.
Say more.
Just not being able to go places when I want to go because my kids are at home, or the postal service has slowed down delivery stuff has really affected.
There's a lot of constraints.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll say kids there, and then I'm going to talk about, and then I'll call that resource constraints. Is that fair?
Yeah. For me, the biggest challenge initially was the inability to plan further than a week out.
Okay, short. So the let's just say, short-term planning only. Okay, what else? Vicky?
I would say trying to figure out who I want to be, not in the complete existential sense, that we could be here all day, but like more like pre-COVID Vicky, during COVID Vicky, post-COVID Vicky. And the silver linings that came out of the quarantine that I want to hang on to are things I tapped into. I'm like, I don't want to lose that, but then I also don't know how to reintegrate that with the rest of the reopening.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's a great dilemma to have and one that they'll have, but it's sort of the. And I think it's one of my favorite things to play with, which we'll do a whole nother section on this, right? But on the whole question of who are we as opposed to what do we do? I think this is a much richer thing to root ourselves in. So great question, Nancy.
I would say the move to the digital world has been disruptive. You know, I'm used to connecting with people in person or speaking at engagements and stuff like that. And that the move to Zoom has flattened relationships.
Okay, so yeah, tech versus in person, whatever forms those were. And well, it did increase accessibility, and you're one of those people who you build relationships really well when you're in person. And so I can see where that was a challenge. Colleen.
My husband and I are constantly talking about like what's the risk level of like taking our kids anywhere.
Yeah, so kind of that constant.
Kind of everything.
Yeah. Great.
Kind of similar to the tech thing, but new learning curves, like it feels like nothing has momentum because everything that you're doing is brand new, so you have to learn new skill sets along with that.
Right. New learning curve. We lost some of those neural pathways where we could just let the marble roll and it knew what to do and it knew how to go, and that's challenging. It's very challenging. Anything else that you guys have experienced? These are brilliant. Thank you they're really varied.
I think the challenge to stay optimistic
Yeah.
throughout all the changes.
Hard. Yeah. And for me, it was a little bit of challenge that nobody names, but I hear a lot. And it was one I experienced too, was kind of the Groundhog Day effect.
Yeah.
Oh, this was like new. We'll order from these neighborhood restaurants. We want to support them. And then all of a sudden, 3 months of the styrofoam containers. I don't feel like we're in the grocery store. And so that was that Groundhog Day effect. Okay. So, we're going to write it black, but we're going to pretend it's green. Symbolically. What were some of the things that actually turned out to be benefits? Some of you mentioned silver linings, some of you can see, but what were things that surprised you, didn't surprise you, that have ended up as being benefits from the disruption, if you will?
Quality time with kids.
Okay, excellent. Our brain's funny, right? We have this thing called the negativity bias, where we're much easier to identify the threats from the benefits. What the hell is that? Okay, great. Debbie?
On the flip side of the Zoom, which are definitely, I do miss the relationships, but it gave me accessibility to work with people who are not in St. Louis, to do some training that was a lot less expensive to do online versus in person.
Okay, other locales. Okay, cool. What else?
I would say that just the slowing down effect from crazy calendars, and now I'm so discerning about what I add back here. Value. What you need.
Yeah, which kind of connects a little bit to what Vicky was saying about who am I? And the quote that I've seen a lot that I use is, everybody's like, can't wait till we get back to normal, right? We could say that for the first 6 months, and then the more interesting question was, what part of normal do we want to return to?
Yeah.
That's a much richer question. Cheryl, you had your hand up.
She's sort of hit mine, so we're good.
Slowing down. Yeah, it's really good.
Prioritize, yeah.
So the reason I had us kind of think about this, I don't believe in what I would call toxic positivity, which is like, if you just reframe your thinking, everything's great, and a bad thing is always good, right? And it can be good for our brains to recognize that some of those uphill climbs that we have, some of those challenges over time, not in the moment, we gotta live through it, we gotta be mad, we gotta feel our feelings, can deliver some interesting benefits to us. Does that make sense to you guys? So I think it's kind of fun to do this. And again, as sophisticated human beings, our minds still will go into, especially when we're under pressure, right? Into all or nothing thinking. It's terrible, it's great. And I think I like, again, the richer place to play is, can we expand into, it's both really hard to be with my kids this much and kind of magical to be with my kids this much. Both of those things are true, right? And as sophisticated adults in our thinking, when we let ourselves, we can hold the space for both of those to be true. Okay, so some of you are like, excellent, now, not enough time on my calendar, let's get to productivity, and we will, because I want to hit 3 key points that I think are meaningful when it comes to some of the conditions that have driven new things for us, right? Those of you who've been around for a while, it's been 9 years since I wrote my book on time management. I still talk about a lot of those tenets from that book for sure. These are kind of new evolution of some ideas related to those core tenets in this phase. And the first one is, more than ever right now, I think we need to understand something called contaminated time. Okay? And contaminated time is not the term that I originated. It was originated by Bridget Schulte, who was a New York Times bestselling author and a Pulitzer Prize winning writer from the Washington Post, who I was lucky enough to get to know and be a friend. I just think she's brilliant. She wrote a book called Overwhelmed about 8 or 9 years ago. And in that book, she spends a lot of time exploring why people are overwhelmed and the fact that everybody's overwhelmed. And since she's not a coach, she never quite got us too far to the other side of what the heck do we do with it. So I recommend her book a lot. She recommends my book a lot for that very reason. But contaminated time is simply the notion that while you're doing something related to work, often our focus, our flow, our productivity, and our intentions are contaminated by thoughts of something that's happening outside of work. And often, when we are outside of work, whether that's home with our families, out trying to enjoy ourselves, doing something else that is not work related, our thoughts migrate back toward work. Can you guys identify with this at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so on a scale of, as one of my clients beautifully said, I would have said contaminated time was like a little bit of a problem where like the water tasted, it was contaminated enough to just taste a little funny before COVID. Since COVID, I'm on full-on boiled water contamination in my water since then, because things have really gotten intermingled, right? And so, first of all, I think it's very helpful to understand the term contaminated time and just be thinking about it. When I first learned it, I was like, yeah, I thought it was just things that happened to me. And what I discovered is when I could be a little more intentional about decontaminating my time, I felt like I could get more meaningful work done at work, and I had more ability to recharge my batteries, refill my gas tank. I mix metaphors a lot. So there's all mix whatever metaphor you want when I was outside of work. So what are effective ways for us to do that? Here are some ideas, tips, tools, if you will, for being able to decontaminate your time. One is to recognize, I just want to say something important. Multitasking is not a thing. And for a while, it was women were kind of doing this to each other. You'd see a lot of female writers and people were talking about it, and I call it the glorification of multitasking. Women are great multitaskers. I'm a multitasker. I'm wonderful at multitasking. And so we sort of would almost wear it as a badge of honor because we're trying to do kids and life. And the truth is, we were sometimes pretty good jugglers because we have to be, right? But multitasking from a brain science perspective is literally impossible. Your brain can focus on one thing at a time. So by pretending that you should multitask, the brain research is unequivocal about this. You are slowing yourself down. You're lowering your efficacy, right, or your effectiveness. Say that. And you are making usually something that is already a little bit taxing, even more taxing than it would be. It's actually called task switching that's happening in your brain. When you're trying to do a bunch of things at once, you're just switching back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, which lowers the focus. One study out of, some of you have heard me say this before, but I love this. One study out of the UK said that people who multitask have the effectiveness of somebody who's very stoned, generally speaking. When they compare people who are not multitasking with those who were, it was about the same level of impediment to outcome as somebody who was high. So just keep that in mind. So one of the keys to avoiding contaminating time is to do the best you can do to try to do one thing at a time. Now, sometimes you guys, because you're going to be coming in if you're working from home or these other things, you can only do 5 minutes of one thing at a time. I'm not pretending. It's like, oh, Jill told me to do that, so now I have no interruptions in my life. I get it. We can't do that. But committing to do a better job of pretending, let's just stop pretending multitasking works. It's going to contaminate your time, and let's get better at focusing on one thing at a time. Another thing that's very helpful is better task management. If you guys, no pressure, but either you guys can put it in the chat, and the staff at Rise will left it for me, or those of you here, if you put your email down here, I'll send you. I have a really good task management system that I'll just email to you. No pressure. I'm not going to put you on my newsletter list or anything. You just have it. My graphic designer worked really hard to put that thing together. So
Marketers say you should put us on your email.
I know.
I
I got too many irons in the fire right now to manage my email list, so I'm just. But yes, thank you for that. Exactly right. And so better task management is going to really help. What does better task management mean? A lot of you do have a to-do list that looks like you kind of just vomiting up every single thing that you should be doing in this week, in this world, to be a citizen of humanity and not a complete failure. It has all the work stuff, all the home stuff, everything on it, so that at the end of every day, you have black and white evidence that you are indeed inadequate and never going to get it all done.
Failures is what I want.
Yeah. So instead, better task management. So do the brain dump. Yeah, your brain's not meant to keep all that stuff in there. Put it onto a long list and then process it. It takes 5 minutes, you guys. 5 minutes. I guarantee you. If we were here for like a couple hours, I would make you do it. Oh, I set a timer. But you brain dump it out and then you process it. Where do you process it to? Time blocks on your calendar. Specific time block. Not 3 hours. Do tasks. That's okay. 5 hours do taxes is not going to get it done. 50 minute segments. Brain science says those are good time blocks for us to use. We don't have diminishing returns from those. So you set 50-minute segments of, process receipts. if you want to get your taxes done all afternoon, great. 15 minutes is process receipts. 45 minutes is go through bank statements and highlight the things that you can write off. Specific tasks in specific time blocks. You're going to get a lot more done. And if you have those separated into stuff you want to get done for home and stuff you want to have done for work and separate task management lists and separate time blocks, it's going to reduce that contaminated time because you're going to spend less time trying to do your taxes and going, oh crap, the camp forms. Oh my gosh, I forgot to write the check for the teacher gift, right? Instead, those from your brain dump list, those are put on specific either daily to-do lists or on time blocks in the calendar. Questions about how task management is going to help a little bit with contaminated time? Yeah, a lot of you are so smart and sophisticated. that sadly, and my physician clients are often this way too, you've been able to freestyle it a little bit too much. And all of a sudden, life and disruptions and too many different of those balls are like, and then you go, wait, I never got that lesson on how to do it. Those of us that were kind of bad at it from the beginning had to figure this out because we couldn't keep all the balls in the air. So that's all you're doing, is just getting some tools and skills to help when things become unmanageable. And then the other third thing that is really important to do when it comes to contaminated time is to do a little bit better job of being honest about your thinking and your focus. So for those of you guys, everybody have a piece of paper. And then and for those of you watching on Zoom, if you guys can grab any old piece of paper, nothing fancy, and any old pen. Maybe I'll see pen. Okay. You're going to draw a great big circle in the middle of your piece of paper. Pretty complicated, it looks about like that. Right? There's your circle, my friends. Not very complicated. And inside the circle, you're going to write things that are kind of challenging you, bothering you, worrying you right now, that are within your control. You don't have to be able to solve the whole problem, but you have to be able to have the teeniest, tiniest little bit of agency to make an impact on the outcome of it, if it goes inside the circle. Outside the circle are things that are challenging you, bothering you, worrying you, that are outside of your control. You have no ability or agency to manage their outcome. And I'm going to give you 1 minute to do that. Okay, what did you guys notice when you did that? Anything? Everything's inside my circle. Yeah. So a lot of things are inside your circle. Most. Okay. So you have some control. What else did you know? That's true for you guys. I see some other people have a little more outside the circle than they do inside.
Like I can't do anything about climate change or Afghanistan or COVID or inflation, you know.
Oh, you went well.
Yeah.
Very close.
Yeah. I love that too.
It's even what was
So that's why I don't watch the news
Yeah. Anybody else notice anything?
I have one that's inside and outside.
Excellent. Good to know, right? Because sometimes we need to break things down, don't we? Yeah, we need to break down the parts of the things that are within our control and let go of the parts that are outside of my control. So I'm not, again, this is not about toxic positivity where I'm like, just let the things go, right? We're our citizens of the world. We want to pay attention. We want to be informed to a degree, but we also may need to put ourselves on the news diet when we get emotionally entangled. If you're a political junkie, new research just came out that when we invest much of our day in binary thinking, whether it's watching our pundits, what I like to call the commercialization conflict pundits, who make money by making us mad or happy about our team, that the more time we spend engaged in that kind of binary thinking, we actually shrink the white matter of our brain. So it's not that you should. So it's not that you should be uninformed. It's just recognizing that when your information is only making you mad and creating pure us and them scenarios, chances are you're not necessarily serving your greater good in the moment. Now, if you see something on the outside, sometimes people will say that. I see something on the outside and I kind of recognize I need to make it be something I take action on because it has to do with justice or something that lines up with my values. Hallelujah, all about that. More often than not, our brain is taking up space on things that are outside the circle, and it's keeping us from taking meaningful action on the things inside the circle. And that's a way that we contaminate our time. So one of the ways I reframe that is when my brain is constantly cycling through threats for us, trying to keep us safe, trying to keep us alive. Our survival brain will do that for us. It's just not our thriving brain. So I acknowledge, okay, yep, thanks for letting me know. There's still, a pandemic going on. And last year, one of the things that came up with people so often is like, when are my kids going back to school? school. And so I would say, if it's not in your control today, let's focus on what's in that circle. I mean, it would report a lot of release of freedom. So this current circle exercise, I swear I do it once a week, sometimes more. When I come home, I just came back from vacation, and I was like, oh, and I sat down with my circle and was like, okay, yeah, I can let those other things go. Here's what matters. Okay, contaminated time. Anybody, any thoughts, questions about that? Okay, second, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I think my struggle with the contaminated time sometimes arises because of the imbalance between important versus urgent.
Yes, you've heard me talk about that before.
And I struggle with that a lot.
Sure.
Like the number of times that I've gotten a text or something while I'm trying to get a grant done, saying that our studio is flooding. I mean, like things like that it's pretty amazing how many times that happens to me in a week. And things like that you cannot ignore, or you can't just like brush it aside and be like, but I'm working on this grant. It's like, well, it's gonna be underwater soon,
Right.
you know?
So I'm gonna do a couple of things with that. Like Stephen Pressfield quote, which Oprah used a lot, and I like it too. It's the most successful people in the world are those that can understand the difference between important and urgent and dare to prioritize important over urgent. Urgent needs two categories, urgent versus emergency.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that may have to happen if the grant is there is you may have to put somebody else for 2 hours on emergency on call. And so that true emergencies can be dealt with. Urgent is usually anxiety driven. Emergency is objectively something real bad's gonna happen if we don't step in right now. Floods are emergency, right? Somebody else who hasn't called us back for 2 weeks that wants to talk to us right now is urgent to them. But when we let their urgency impede into our important, that's where I talk about, you guys have heard me talk about where we're flying the plane and then we keep landing it. We're gonna use a lot more energy and fuel than if we stay in flow. So it's what is important when it comes to the uncontaminated time. It's about time blocking a container of time. It may not be in your world longer than 45 minutes at a time where you could have somebody else on emergency on call. But I guarantee you, the brain research says, if you really turn off distractions, including, our dings from texts and alerts, you will get more done in less time. So time blocking in that way. And, if you've got little kids in daycare, if your partner or a trusted family member can't be on emergency on call, that distraction is a frustrating reality that we live through. So I compassionately understand that too. I'm not trying to be hardline about it. But yeah, great question. Great. Is that helpful?
It is. I like the two categories of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they feel the same in our bodies.
Yeah,
Urgent
they do.
and emergency feel the same way, but they're not. Right? When somebody's mad at me, it feels as threatening as a flood. It is not. It is usually about that. Right. But boy, it sure feels that way in my visceral, and to the people pleaser itself. Does that make sense? Okay. Second line, and I think this is going to play in a little bit to your question, is understanding boundaries. Never before in the history of all humanity of being a woman business owner or employee or entrepreneur or whatever you are, have you needed to do a better job with boundaries. And if you're like me, you're not naturally great at it. People would say to me over and over and over again, Jill, you need better boundaries. And my brain read that as put up walls and separate yourself from people, Jill, which is very counterintuitive to my nature, anybody who knows me. And so my solution to that was to have no boundaries, which did not work very well for my time, for my values, because what would happen is I would just get more and more frustrated and do a better job of holding in my feelings and then expect that everyone else would just somehow through ESP, or I'm aging myself there, anyway, through psychic skills could read my brain and know that they need to leave me alone. And so then what would happen is what I described as the exploding doormat. Is I've not told you I need uninterrupted, non-disrupted time. I've told you I'm the same, friendly, whatever, let me be here for you. And then if we're just close enough that you're not a complete stranger to me, you show up and I go, what are you doing? And I suddenly exploded my doormat on you. You just were trying to connect. So, important thing to understand about boundaries is there's boundaries with people. I like to think of boundaries as, I always start my boundaries with, as like, you know, you go to Kentucky to the countryside and they have those beautiful white fences that have a lot of space between them. See each other, you see the horses, people see each other, but I'm not gonna jump that fence and go in and see them because I know that's their space, that's my space, but boy, we can really see and connect each other. That's where I start. And then with some people and situations, sometimes you gotta shore it up and put some more, raise it up a little bit, but that's where we start. And it's actually a bright line of clarity between what my expectations are, what your expectations are, and keeping those clear with an idea of not jumping those on each other, okay? Boundaries are not walls. They're not stone walls that you build like, you know, the old castles, which I think some people think. The problem with that is then we don't have communication. So the people outside the wall sometimes feel like they need to attack or they need to separate or they need to run away. We're inside second guessing everything. There's no communication. I like, you know, sometimes in certain situations, certainly in threats of physical or emotional harm, build the dang fortress. No problem with that. But in other cases, in life and business, start with clarity in our white fence. Start with that. Get clear yourself. What are my bright line boundaries? Because that's another problem is if we're uncomfortable, like I have always been, with the boundary, then I don't name it and it's moving. And that makes it tough for other people to honor it. So get clear myself, where's my bright line boundary? Where do I want it to be? Some other examples of places in our post-pandemic world to increase our productivity, where we really need to be increasing boundaries around our time, right? We need to have a boundary of when the end of our day is. Yeah, for sure. I mean, with almost everybody from Fortune 500 executives to everybody else, I'm coaching people on doing things like, if you don't have a door to your office, lay your chair down in front of your computer. It relaxes you to do a quick email check before you go to bed, set a timer on your phone so that you're done. Physical, real, visceral ends of days, beginning, middle, and end are really important right now. So when we're talking about boundaries, we're not just talking about people, we're talking about time, clear, concise containers is what I like to call them, of time, of when there's a beginning and a middle and an end. And another place where I see a lot of people that could use a little shoring up of their boundaries is around being clear on whether you mean yes, no, or maybe. How many of you love saying no? Nobody there either.
Christmas, family Christmas.
Okay, yeah, she has a bright line boundary. No family Christmas for sure, great. But if you're like the rest of us, I'd really rather go, oh, whatever, and have the other person say no. And go, okay, yeah. Then I would be the one to say no. And so here's a little formula that I created. We're doing a better job of saying no, because again, if in this world, we can't just go around saying yes to everybody. Saying yes to everybody is not in service to ourselves or to everybody else. And I like to say, I borrow this from somebody else, but that saying no often makes room for more yeses. And more yeses are the things that are inside our circle, that matter to us, that are within our values. So how do I say no? I like to ask 3 simple questions. First one is, do I want to do this? Second, do I have time to do this? Does this fit in my available time? Not in fantasy land, not in my most optimistic Jill, but in real life Jill time. Do I have time to do this? And number 3, does this line up with my values? Does this matter to me? Does this matter to things that in the world that are important to me? And if the answer to 2 of those questions is no, then you gotta say no. If the answer to 1 of those questions is no, consider saying no. So let me give you an example. I remember once when somebody asked me to work concessions from one of my kids' sporting events. Back to Vicky's first career. It was not my first career, and it was not my desired use of time. So do I want to do it? Nope. Do I have time to do it? Technically, within the time frame they asked me, I was available because I was driving my kid all the way there. Does it line up with my values? Yeah, it actually did in that particular case, because I knew that the money that we raised in concessions provided scholarships for kids because club sports were incredibly expensive. And so it made it more inclusive for a wider sector of socioeconomically to do it. So did I go in with rainbows and unicorns about, yay, concessions? No, but I felt better about doing it. I didn't say yes, reluctantly. And so that's just a way to play. And when I would say no to people, and I know some of you have heard me say this before, but I gave you such a long explanation why I was justified in saying no. Everybody needed the shower by the time I was done. It was just, and so when I ask myself those questions, I'm just super clear. Thanks for asking me. I know you're going to find the right person to do this. Right now, it doesn't fit with my available time, and I can't make this a priority. Yeah, circle back around in 6 years. 6 years. Yeah, 6 years. Okay, last one of tips and ideas and tools today for helping to increase our pandemic productivity. And that is a little bit esoteric, but I think it's been powerful, is why smashing our old time clocks that we used to click into can actually increase our productivity and success. And a lot of you know this, like, because you had to, because the kids were done with online school at 3 and you knew you had a 2-hour window in the afternoon. How many of you noticed, like, holy moly, I actually got done with stuff today in a shorter window? And so I'm saying this to you as leaders of yourselves, of other people in your businesses and in your community, is let's start to make a change in the world by looking more carefully at outcomes and less carefully at hours.
Amen.
Working smarter, not harder. And some of you that are in billable hours industries like accounting and law are like, oh, Jill, you don't understand. I do understand. Believe me, I do a lot of work in both of the sectors, and they're changing a little bit in a consultancy model. But I think all of us need to think more creatively around how, even if it's the way you bill clients, anything else, think more creatively so that we don't let, we used to say in Iowa, hog tie ourselves to these, to somebody else's who's less productive time frame. Because by the time we have mastery, a lot of times we can do stuff efficiently and effectively. We put some of the other things in place. One of the members here at Rise, who I've worked with in coaching relationship and gave me permission to share this, said with a business partner for a long time, they had the kind of relationship. He was a majority investor, she was a minority investor, and he would say, "Okay, well, what are your hours? When are you working?" And after a conversation we had, she said, "I'm going to stop checking in on the number of hours I'm working with you, and we're going to get clear on objectives and outcomes that are expected in this relationship. And I'm going to report outcomes and objectives and whether I've achieved those objectives to you. And I'll expect you to do the same. But I'm not telling you how many hours I'm working anymore, because at this point, it's exhausting me to track them. And frankly, I can get stuff done. I have, times of the day that aren't when I'm sitting in my office, and I want to do that." And I thought that was really an excellent way of reframing the old. I mean, this is stuff that's been ingrained and baked into our bones from way back when, from factory days. It doesn't make sense in a lot of our businesses, but yet we still do it. We monitor other people's work based on the number of hours versus outcome. We monitor ourselves on hours versus outcome, and we get monitored that way. So I'm encouraging us as one of the benefits of this post-pandemic world to be able to consider that. So today's idea is contaminated time, understanding how boundaries can help us launch productivity. And under contaminated time, we're talking about crossing out multitasking, using time blocking and better task management, the importance of using that brain dump and then processing it into a list, and getting clear on what's in our control and what's out of our control. We're not going to say yes to everything and hope that the other person cancels so we don't have to feel bad about it. I mean, Oprah used to say, right, let no be a complete sentence. That was never quite comfortable for me, but I also didn't have to let no be such a diatribe either. So I found some little space there. And then we're going to smash the old time clock model for a more productive, meaningful, effective way of doing it. Questions, comments? What do you have for me? You guys are going to be monitoring them.
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah, Mika.
So what do we do with the things outside the circle?
Great question. So one of the things that impacts me is when my fight or flight reaction has been triggered by something that's there, is this is from heart psychology. Thank you to my protector heart. Usually it's mine is like sounds like a 13-year-old girl. It's always on the prowl to make sure something bad is happening. Thank you for alerting me to the concern. And I'm actually safe and okay in this present moment. And so since I'm safe and okay, I'm going to let that go now. Let it go for all time. In the present moment, the only moment we're really living. I'm going to give myself the gift of not projecting scary stories forward about things that haven't happened, or ruminating back about things that have already happened that I can't change. That's a stress management tool for coming back here now. And remembering that I am safe, I'm breathing, I'm okay, and I can, some people like to send love, prayer, good wishes to whatever the people that are being impacted by that. That could be a helpful way to get connected, to do something that feels like you're acknowledging it without take your brain on the runaway train. Where it can control. Is that helpful? Yes. Thank you for the question.
So your thing around saying no, that's been a work in progress for me for several years, and so I like this benchmark, but I just wanted to share with the group. I'm usually so quick in the moment that for me, like stopping to be like, just answer the 3 questions. Oh my God, what are the 3 questions? What should I say? You know what I mean? So somebody taught me once to say, let me think about it and get back to you. That in and of itself was life changing. That I didn't just respond. But one of the big barometers for me, and I heard this on a podcast once, and it really hit me hard right here, where it was, if you say yes, does it feel good right now? Feels good right now. Does it feel good 5 minutes from now? 5 hours from now? 5 days from now? You know what I mean? And it was very interesting when I could start looking at saying yes to things in that way. Most things felt good saying yes right this second. But I mean, easily 5 minutes from now, I could just be like, oh wait, that didn't feel good anymore. Now what have I done to myself? So that whole concept of pausing and then saying, okay, is it still gonna feel good even 5 days from now? Usually it was like, oh God, what have I done to myself?
Yeah, really
So-
good. It's a perspective. It's giving your non-reactive brain, right? The amygdala that can only react to things, a chance, the whole neocortex, a chance to weigh in on stuff, right? So my biggest fear is having people mad at me. I have an overreactive yes to please other people. So if I want to respond instead of reacting, you've just given us a great technique. When we talk about reframing in challenging situations, which has kind of been something we've needed to do in the last year a lot, some resilience. I call it the 10s. Is this gonna matter to me in 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, 10 months? And a lot of times that kind of like, I'm really stressing out about something. That's where we go back to that circle exercise. That long term, even though it feels uncomfortable now. And that's another thing about saying no is we have to learn to be a little uncomfortable. I didn't like the discomfort I felt saying no to somebody. They might be mad or disappointed. So I was willing to live in agony and suffering later, and anger and resentment, because I wasn't willing to have tiny little discomfort now. That was crazy. So my adult brain began to be able to say, yeah, it's always gonna feel uncomfortable. You're a big girl. You know, sometimes I don't want to brush my teeth every day, but I still do it, right? We have to do some things that are a little uncomfortable sometimes.
And the other thing I wanted to just share on that from a perspective standpoint is I had one friend that I met, this was in my 20s before I'd even tried to start working on this. And she would just be like, no, I can't. Or, you know, like I'd be talking on the phone, she'd go, hold on, she'd click over, and then she'd come back and she didn't feel the need to explain to me like why she had to put me on hold. You know what, I mean, she was just not mean, but she was very succinct. And I said to her one day, I'm like, I don't understand how you do that. How do you just say, oh, no, I can't, without an explanation, right? And she was like, that's so weird. I never thought about it that way. She goes, I just assume nobody cares about my explanation. Like, why don't they want to know? And I'm like, you're right. Why do I feel the need to tell everybody all the time? So those are just like two like pearls of wisdom that really helped me a lot.
Yeah, those are excellent. Thank you. Do we have any questions here? Okay, good. I want to make sure we got to that. Those are really excellent. Yeah. Vicky.
By the way, and you don't hear men explaining.
Amen.
So, you know, you mentioned something, this was actually a prior webinar that we did, that I had been trying to do, but I haven't been doing very well. But the time blocking, not only just the brain dump and then making the personal list and the work list, but then applying those tasks to the calendar. You said something or other like only book 60 or time block 60 or maybe 70% of your day because of those unexpected things that are going to come in. And God, that's so hard.
It is
because
hard.
like I see, plus I hate when people can see your calendar. Like, no, that's not a free block of time where I'm sitting here literally doing this. Like, you know, no, that's an open block of time for unexpected things or.
So in Outlook, you have to block that project time.
I think you're right.
Yeah, you have to. If you have shared calendar, if you're on, you know, nobody's looking at my calendar, so I can leave it blank. So she's referring to, yeah, productivity research says that people, if people who block minute by minute, it looks so efficient, and darn it, if it doesn't feel good, it feels like, oh, my calendar is just perfectly blocked. But it tends to increase our stress as the day goes on because somebody dares to walk up to us. There's a
You
phone
might need
call.
to use the rest.
You have to use the restroom, your studio flowers, whatever shows up. And so we set ourselves up for failure. I always say it's like, oh, this is true with a lot of my physician clients. I use this metaphor a lot. They're super good at being really strong at holding a giant platter full of stuff. And it's packed all the time. I'm like, see, I'm good at this, except when somebody else or life starts putting other stuff on the platter, the whole dang thing gets dumped. And so we've got to leave some space for the unexpected things on the platter, or you're setting yourself up. So that's just a tactical, practical way to do that, is leaving some space on the calendar. And it's uncomfortable to do because we don't feel like we're doing enough. But in the end, it's a smart move. It's working smarter, not harder around it. Nancy, last thing.
Well, the other thing I noticed about time blocking is when I first started doing this, I was way underestimating the amount of time that things would take. And then, you know, you're trying to cram stuff in. So I started adding 100% to it. And since sometimes that wasn't enough.
What do you mean, Eddie?
Adding, like I say, oh, this will take an hour. I make it
got it.
block 2 hours. And then
Right.
that wasn't maybe even.
That's
So I had to learn more about myself and about the pace at which things could be.
right. So we usually, all of us have coping mechanisms. For some of us, it's to underestimate it so we can get more done, which is a coping mechanism that doesn't serve us because of honesty. Other people, it's to think it's going to be so hard that they procrastinate, and it actually ends up not being as hard as they thought. So those two, playing with understanding our own coping mechanisms, acknowledging with love that that's the tendency, and then taking inspired action to do what actually works. Double the time on the calendar, right? For me, it's double the amount of time I think it is to get out the door, because I was like, one more email, one more whatever. And so I've learned to change my behavior. Guys, I'm going to stay around for more questions because this is great, but I know I want to let the rest of you go. I hope I get to come back soon because this is my favorite. I love it. It was so fun. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for your insights. It was a real honor.